Troubleshooting EIGRP version 6. Here is your EIGRP version 6 flyby. Essentially, the network in front of you has been configured. We've got the IPv6 address 2001 DB86783X, where X represents the specific subnet that the devices land on, right? So the base configuration of IPv6 is done. Let's add EIGRPv6 to it. Now, Cisco's gone out of their way to make it insanely easy to enable EIGRP in this environment. Go into global configuration mode. I'm going to type in IPv6 router EIGRP and follow it up with an autonomous system number. Let's just use 10, right? Now, underneath here, I need to give it a router ID, and I only need to do this if I have no IPv4 addresses sitting on the router. It's essentially the name of the router as it relates to EIGRP. It's never going to be used to ping or anything like that. It's just kind of a name. But I also need to make sure that I go under here and do a no shutdown. Cisco, when they enabled this a router feature, essentially it comes up in a shutdown state until we, just like an interface, power it back on. Now I go under the interfaces that I want to run EIGRPv6 and enable it. So let's go under fast Ethernet 0/0. I'll do IPv6 EIGRP 10 serial 0/0. Hit the up arrow. Done. And I've now enabled IPv6 on router 1. So let's hit the router 2 and router 3. So router 2, global config mode, IPv6 router EIGRP 10. We'll do router ID 2222. No shutdown. Interface fast Ethernet 0/0. IP EIGRP or IPv6. EIGRP 10 and serial 0/0. Notice the neighbor relationship is formed already there. We've got router 3, our last one. We'll go into global config mode, IPv6 router EIGRP 10, router ID 3333. Hopefully this is solidifying, hammering those concepts into your head if they're not there already. No shutdown. Interface serial 0/0 on router 3, and we'll do IPv6 EIGRP 10. Right? We now have that enabled, and we see the neighbor relationship forming. Now, notice the neighbor relationship is forming between the link local addresses. So the hello messages are coming up between those two. I can now on router 3 do a show IPv6 route, and I should see the D that represents EIGRP learning these two new routes that it's advertising around the network of the 122 and the 123 subnets in IPv6. I can do a show IPv6 EIGRP neighbor, and I can see there's my one neighbor address, link local address that it's formed. I can do a neighbor detail and see a little bit more about that that guy, how long he's been running for, version, how many retransmissions or retries we've had on there. And that's, I'm trying to think, is there more to EIGRP version 6? That's the core of it right there. So EIGRP version 6 can suffer from the same things as any routing protocol. That is, an interface is down or you forget to enable it using the IPv6 EIGRP command, or neighbors aren't forming, and they might not be forming because maybe you mismatched the autonomous system number between the neighbors, or you've got a mismatch authentication, or maybe you set the timers lower on one, and so if you set them too low, you end up with a hold down time mismatch where the neighbor starts going down and up and down and up and down and up, because they will form even though they have mismatched timers. However, one will expect it to say hello more often or less often, and will start dropping the neighbor when it doesn't respond in those time frames, right? So some of these commands, let's just hit the big ones. I always put these in priority order if you're ever wondering. These are the ones that I say, okay, these are the most important to type. So if I'm troubleshooting, first thing I do is do a show run section IPv6 router. I'll just leave it at that. IPv6 router, and it'll show me I've got EIGRP running. It tells me what autonomous system. I can verify that I've got the router ID typed in there so that it is forming a neighbor relationship with that name, essentially. I can also do, and actually I didn't include this in the list, but it should be a no-brainer, interface, to where I can say, well, what are the interface configurations look like? And this shows you every single interface that's on there, both the IPv6 address as well as the fact that I've got that interface enabled for EIGRP. I already showed you the neighbors detail. Show IPv6 interface brief gives me a report of all the IP addresses that are assigned as well as the interface status on each one of those. Great to see if the interface is up or down. I can do a show IPv6 protocols, which is trimmed down way far from the previous show IP protocols, but it does give me a quick view of what protocol is running and what interfaces it's running on, and if I'm really curious on what the K values are, that's the metric calculation of EIGRP. I can verify it there. I have this cough, and so I'm sucking on this throat lozenge. But when I'm recording, I kind of tuck it into my cheek. I don't know if you've ever done that with a throat lozenge before, because after about 5 minutes of talking, like my whole cheek has gone numb. I'm starting to drool out of this side of my mouth. Okay, so I'm going to do show IPv6. EIGRP interfaces detail. This is because a lot of times with this show IP protocols being so trimmed down, they've taken a lot of the output and put it under other commands. Like, for instance, this one will show me how often I'm saying hello on each one of these interfaces. Could be a very valuable troubleshooting technique to make sure that my hello timers are matching and how many peers are forming on each one of these interfaces. Finally, I can do a debug IPv6 EIGRP. And you can see there's not too many options under this one. I can zoom in on a specific neighbor, summary route processing, and all that. But right now, it will just debug if there's an event going on. So if I go to router 2, let's just say and do a shutdown on its interface, I should see router 1. See? It's like, hey, processing incoming query. I'm deleting this guy, this local route, out of the table. He no longer exists. So I'm able to actually watch when things are happening using the debug command that I showed you right there. So what else can go on? ACL. Again, we could have an access list blocking the protocol of EIGRP, or route filters turned on. You've got a distribution list defined somewhere that's filtering the routes either coming in or out that you forget about, and so routes aren't showing up at certain places. And then, of course, we have the famous split horizon. We all love that EIGRP is an advanced distance vector routing protocol. Who remembers distance vector, right? Distance vector means that you only know what your neighbors tell it. And one of the loop prevention mechanisms of a distance vector routing protocol is to say, I will only send routes out a different interface than the one that they were received on. I think I said that backwards from the way I usually say it. That's accurate, but what Split Horizon, the rules of Split Horizon says is do not send a route out the same interface you receive that advertisement on. So essentially, if router 2 sends you a route, router 1, don't flip back around and send them the same route. That's what Split Horizon is. Well, EIGRP can have problems with that when you're in a hub and spoke topology. Let's just say this is a frame relay kind of connection, right? if a route comes in this interface, because this would be one physical interface connecting to router 2, 3, and 4, then I have to disable split horizon so it can come right out and send it out to router 2 or router 3 and router 4. The alternative to that is to use sub interfaces, right? Go point-to-point sub interfaces rather than point-to-multi-point like I'm doing right here. In order to resolve that situation. I always tell folks, point-to-multipoint is evil, and it seems like the only place you have to use it is in an exam environment. I know there's real-world cases for it, but I always, if I can, use point-to-point subinterfaces. We've now got your EIGRP version 6 troubleshooting skills down. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.